Welcome to Ripper's Nighttime Tales, a chilling series of bedtime horror stories narrated by the horror streamer Mr. Rippers with soft rain and thunder. Drift off to multiple scary tales perfect for late night listening on rumble.com. Do hit that like button and consider following the channel. Leave a comment letting me know where and when you listen. Let's build a community. Okay, let's get started. October 14th, 1999. The bottle of Jim Beam on the laminate table was empty, save for a single amber tear sliding down the glass interior. It moved sluggishly, mirroring the slow, throbbing cadence of a headache attempting to split my skull in two. The air in the trailer was stagnant, a suffocating mixture of stale cigarette smoke, mildewing carpet, and the unmistakable, copper-tinged scent of despair. I stared at my reflection in the dark window above the sink. The man staring back was a stranger, or at least a ruin of someone I used to know. Greasy hair, graying prematurely at the temples, framed a face comprised of slack skin and hollowed-out eyes. I looked like something that had been chewed up and spat out by the universe. In many ways I was... Then the music started. It wasn't a sound so much as a vibration, a low-frequency hum that rattled the loose fillings in my molars. It drifted in from the woods behind the trailer park, slicing through the drone of the crickets and the distant highway hum. It was calliope music, warped, distorted, slowing down and speeding up like a cassette tape left on a dashboard in the height of July. Do-do-do-do. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until sparks danced in the darkness. "Stop it," I hissed, the sound of my own voice startling me. "Just stop." But it didn't stop. It grew louder, a sickly sweet melody that smelled like burning sugar and ozone. It was the sound of a childhood memory rotting from the inside out. I grabbed the wrench I'd left on the counter, a heavy, rusted monkey wrench that felt like an extension of my own arm after 20 years under the hoods of Fords and Chevys, and kicked the trailer door open. The night air was thick, humid for October. The moon was a bloated, hemorrhaging thing, hanging fat and low in the sky, casting a light that wasn't white or yellow, but the color of a fresh bruise. It painted the rows of aluminum trailers in shades of purple and black. No one else was outside. The park was a graveyard of the living, blue television light flickering in windows like dying pulses. They couldn't hear it, just like they couldn't hear Jenny screaming in my dreams every night. "Come play, Riley, come play." The thought wasn't mine. It slithered into my ear canal, wet and invasive. I stumbled off the porch, the wet grass soaking through my boots. I shouldn't go into the woods. I knew that. The woods behind the park were a tangle of briars and sinkholes, a place where stray dogs went to die and teenagers went to get pregnant. But the music was a physical tether, a hook lodged in my sternum, pulling me forward. I crossed the boundary of the tree line. The temperature plummeted instantly. The air here didn't smell like pine or earth. It smelled like hydraulic fluid and rancid meat. The undergrowth fought me. Thorny vines, thick as my wrist, seemed to undulate in the peripheral vision, snagging my jeans, tearing at my flannel shirt. I swatted them away with the wrench, the metal clanging against the wood with a sound that was too hollow, too metallic. I walked for what felt like hours, though my watch stopped dead at 3:33 offered no guidance. The trees grew twisted here, their bark pale and peeling like sunburned skin. The canopy overhead was so dense it choked out the bruised moonlight, leaving me to navigate by the flickering, erratic glow that began to pulse through the foliage ahead. And then the trees simply stopped. I stepped into a clearing that shouldn't have existed. It was a crater of trampled mud and sawdust, vast and impossible. And there, rising like the skeletal remains of a prehistoric beast, was the carnival. It was dead, yet teeming with a vile mimicry of life. The rides were rusted hulks, the paint peeling in long, fleshy strips. The lights strung between the booths didn't buzz with electricity. They hissed, the bulbs flickering with a bioluminescent fluid that sloshed inside the glass. The Meat Grinder Carnival. I didn't read the name. I felt it. It was etched into the atmosphere, a heavy, oppressive title that weighed on my shoulders. "Hello?" I called out. The word was swallowed by the silence, then regurgitated by the echo, distorted and mocking. Hello, ello, lo, lo. I walked down the Midway. The ground beneath my boots was spongy. Looking down, I realized it wasn't mud. It was a slurry of sawdust and something dark and viscous, like congealed gravy. To my left, a carousel turned slowly, though there was no engine running. The horses were flayed. Their painted skin had been stripped away to reveal rusted gears and pistons that looked disturbingly like bone and muscle. Their glass eyes followed me, rolling in their sockets with a wet click, click, click. I gripped the wrench tighter, my knuckles white. Is anyone here? A booth to my right flared to life. A spotlight, harsh and yellow, slammed down onto the counter. Whack-a-mole. The sign was painted in erratic, dripping red letters. But the moles weren't cute, cartoonish rodents. I approached the booth, drawn by a morbid curiosity that overrode every survival instinct I possessed. The counter was covered in dried brown stains. A heavy mallet lay there, the handle wrapped in leather that felt warm to the touch. Play Riley, win a prize. The voice was Jenny's. My breath hitched. Jenny? Win me back, Riley. Just play the game. I reached for the mallet. As my hand closed around it, I felt a pulse. The handle was throbbing, a slow, rhythmic beat against my palm. I should have dropped it. I should have run back to the trailer, locked the door, and swallowed every pill in the cabinet. But I missed her? God, I missed her so much it felt like my chest was caved in. I'm playing, I whispered. The machine whirred. It was a wet, sucking sound, like a boot being pulled out of deep mud. The first hole opened. It wasn't a mechanical shutter. The wood of the console stretched and tore, opening like a sphincter. And from the darkness of the hole, something surged up. It wasn't a mole. It was a finger. A human finger, severed at the knuckle, pale and swollen. It wriggled frantically, the nail cracked and yellowed. I froze. Hit it! Jenny's voice screamed, turning shrill. Instinct took over. I swung the mallet. Crunch. The impact was sickeningly soft. The mallet didn't bounce. It squashed. The finger burst. Arterial spray, hot and blindingly red, erupted from the stump, splattering across my face and the front of my shirt. It tasted metallic, salt and iron. The machine dinged a sound like a hammer hitting a raw steak. Another hole puckered open, another finger. This one was adorned with a silver ring, a wedding band. My stomach lurched. I knew that ring. It belonged to Old Man Miller, the guy who ran the grocery store in town. He'd vanished 2 weeks ago. Whack. I brought the hammer down. The bone shattered under the impact, the sound amplifying in the quiet clearing. More blood, more spray. 2 holes opened, then 3. They were popping up faster now. Thumbs, pinkies, index fingers. Some were clean, some were dirty. One had a tattoo of a spiderweb on the knuckle. Billy Ray, the local dealer who went missing in September. I was sobbing now, tears mixing with the blood on my face. Stop. I don't want to play. Keep hitting, Riley. Clear the board. I swung wildly. Splat. Crunch. Hiss. The console was awash in gore. Chunks of flesh and shattered bone fragments littered the wood. The smell was overpowering, a slaughterhouse left to bake in the sun. I swung until my shoulder burned, until the mallet was slick in my grip. Finally, the music stopped. The holes puckered shut, swallowing the pulp that remained. A mechanical grinding noise echoed from the back of the booth. A slot opened, and my prize fell out. It hit the metal tray with a wet thud. I leaned forward, trembling. It was a human ear, freshly severed. I recoiled, dropping the mallet. It hit the ground and rolled, coming to a stop against my boot. The ear twitched. I scrambled backward, slipping in the gore-slicked sawdust. I fell hard on my ass, the breath knocked out of me. I crab-walked backward, away from the booth, away from the trophy. No more, I gasped. No more. But the carnival was just waking up. Lights flared further down the Midway. The Hall of Mirrors, the sign above it was cracked, the neon buzzing angrily. Reflections of the soul. I scrambled to my feet. I needed to leave. I needed to find the tree line. I spun around, intending to run back the way I came. The path was gone. Where the trees had been, there was now a wall of canvas. Thick, heavy circus tent canvas, stretching up into the black sky, stitched together with what looked like black wire and hair. I ran to it, slashing at it with my wrench. The canvas bled. Thick, black ichor oozed from the tears, sealing them shut as fast as I made them. Trapped, I muttered. I'm trapped. Not trapped, Riley. Chosen. The voice wasn't Jenny's anymore. It was deeper, guttural, like gravel grinding in a cement mixer. I turned back to the Midway. The Hall of Mirrors was the only path forward. The alleyway between the booths had narrowed, forcing me toward the entrance. I walked toward it, the wrench raised like a talisman. The entrance to the fun house was a giant clown's mouth, the paint chipped, the teeth made of jagged shards of mirror. I stepped through the lips, into the gullet. Inside, the air was freezing. The walls were lined with mirrors, hundreds of them, angled in every direction. I looked at the first one. It wasn't me. The reflection wore my clothes. It had my face, but it wasn't me. Reflection Riley was standing in a bathroom, holding a razor blade. He looked out at me, his eyes dead, and smiled. Then, slowly, methodically, he drew the blade across his throat. I watched, paralyzed, as the wound opened. It was anatomically precise. The skin parted, the layer of yellow fat, and then the dark rush of the jugular. I screamed. I couldn't hear my own scream, though. All I could hear was the wet gurgle coming from the glass. I squeezed my eyes shut and ran. I bumped into walls, glass shattering under my elbows. I opened my eyes. Another mirror. In this one, Reflection Riley was hanging from a rafter, his face purple and bloated, tongue protruding, his legs kicked feebly, the boots scraping against the air. I turned away. Another mirror. Reflection Riley was being fed into a wood chipper, feet first. He was screaming, his hands clawing at the intake chute, fingernails tearing off as he was dragged down. I swung the wrench. Smash. The mirror shattered. But behind the glass, there was no wall. There was flesh. Raw, pulsing muscle tissue, warm and wet. The shards of mirrors stuck in it like shrapnel. The glass began to weep. Not condensation. Blood. It slid down the panels, warm and thick, pooling on the floor. Riley. I spun around. Standing at the far end of the corridor, where the exit should have been, was a figure. It was massive. At least 7 feet tall. It wore a tattered ringmaster's tailcoat, the red velvet stained black with old gore. But it was the man, the thing inside the coat, that froze the marrow in my bones. He was a patchwork quilt of atrocities. His skin was a mosaic of mismatched grafts, some pale, some dark, some hairy, some scarred. They were stitched together with thick black sutures that looked like fishing line. His face was a ruin. One eye was blue, the other brown, one sewn shut. His jaw was missing a cheek, revealing rows of teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. But it was his right arm that drew my eye. From the elbow down, the flesh had been fused with metal. Rusting bolts pierced the skin, anchoring a massive gleaming meat cleaver where a hand should be. The metal was pitted, but the edge was razor sharp, shining with a wicked silver light. He breathed, and the sound was a wet rattle, like fluid in the lungs. The Barker, I whispered, the name appearing in my mind unbidden. He grinned. The skin around his mouth split, weeping yellow serum. Step right up, he bellowed. His voice was a physical force, smelling of bile and rot. Step right up to the main event. He raised the cleaver arm. I didn't wait. I turned and ran back into the maze of mirrors. Behind me, I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of his boots. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape, and the sound of the cleaver dragging along the glass walls, a high-pitched shriek that set my teeth on edge. Screech. You can't hide, Riley, the Barker laughed, a sound that bubbled up through the fluid in his throat. The carnival is hungry. The gears are dry. I scrambled through the twisting corridors. The reflections were getting worse. They weren't just dying now, they were rotting. I saw myself decomposing in fast motion, skin sloughing off bone, eyes liquefying. I turned a corner and hit a dead end. No. I spun around. The Barker was there, blocking the path. He filled the corridor, his massive frame blotting out the light. Found you, he rumbled. He raised the cleaver. I gripped the wrench. It was pathetic, a toy against a monster. What do you want? I screamed. We want all of you, he said. He took a step forward. We want the misery, the guilt, the meat. He lunged. I dove to the left, crashing into a mirror. It shattered, and I fell through. I didn't hit a wall. I tumbled out into the open air. I rolled in the sawdust, gasping for breath. I was back in the Midway, but the Midway had changed. The ground was undulating now, heaving like a breathing chest. The rides were moving faster. The carousel was spinning at a blur, the flayed horses screaming, actually screaming, as they dissolved into a red mist. And looming over it all, in the center of the park, was the Ferris wheel. It was colossal. The structure was made of rusted iron that looked like fused spines. The cabins weren't seats, they were cages. And at the bottom of the wheel, where the passengers would load, there was a grinder. Two massive, counter-rotating drums, covered in spikes. They roared with a deafening mechanical hunger. I saw movement in the cages above. People. Locals. I saw Old Man Miller. I saw Billy Ray. They were pounding on the bars, screaming silently. As the wheel turned, the bottom cage descended toward the grinder. I watched in horror as the cage opened. A figure tumbled out. It was Jenny. My heart stopped. Jenny, I screamed, sprinting toward the wheel. She fell. She hit the rollers. The sound was indescribable. A wet, tearing crunch that vibrated through the soles of my boots. A plume of red mist erupted from the machine, spraying into the air. No. I fell to my knees. The red mist rained down on the gears of the Ferris wheel. The rust shrieked as the blood lubricated the mechanism, the wheel turning smoother, faster. She's not gone, Riley. The Barker's voice boomed from behind me. I turned. He was standing there, the cleaver dripping. She regenerates. We all do. That's the game. I looked back at the grinder. The slurry of meat and bone that had come out the bottom was moving. It was bubbling, knitting itself back together. Bones snapped into place. Muscle wove itself over the skeleton. Skin grew over the muscle. In seconds, a pile of gore reformed into a human shape. Jenny lay there in the mud, naked, shivering, whole. She looked at me, her eyes filled with infinite terror. Riley, help me, the Barker laughed. Round two. He stepped toward her. He grabbed her by the hair with his human hand. Let her go. I charged him. I didn't care about the cleaver. I didn't care about the size difference. I swung the wrench with everything I had. It connected with his knee. There was a sickening crack. The Barker roared, dropping Jenny. He swung the cleaver backhand. It caught me in the ribs. The pain was blinding. I felt ribs snap. I felt the cold steel slice through muscle. I was thrown backward, landing in the mud next to the grinder. My vision swam. I looked down at my side. A gash, deep and ragged, was pouring blood. The barker limped toward me, his shattered knee grinding. He raised the cleaver for the killing blow. "You lose," he growled. I looked at the grinder. I looked at the heavy hydraulic hose powering it. I looked at the wrench in my hand. "Not yet," I wheezed. I rolled, not away from him, but toward the machine. I jammed the wrench into the exposed gears of the grinder's motor. Clang, crunch, scree. The machine seized. The gears stripped. The hydraulic line burst. High-pressure fluid, hot and caustic, sprayed out like a fire hose. It hit the barker directly in the face. He screamed a sound that wasn't human. The fluid melted the stitches holding his face together. His jaw sloughed off. The grafts on his chest split open, spilling necrotic organs onto the ground. The carnival shrieked. Every light bulb exploded simultaneously. The rides ground to a halt. The ground began to swallow us. The mud turned to quicksand. I reached for Jenny. "Grab my hand!" She reached out. Our fingers brushed. Then the earth opened up beneath her. She fell, screaming, into the darkness below. "Jenny!" I lunged. But the mud had me. It was dragging me down. I fought, kicking, clawing. The barker was dissolving, his form collapsing into a pile of rotting meat and rusted metal. The world went black. October 15th, 1999. I woke up with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in bed. I was in my trailer. The sun was streaming through the dirty window. Dust motes danced in the light. I checked my ribs. No gash, no blood. Just a dull ache from sleeping on the lumpy mattress. I looked at my hands. Clean. No blood. No grease. "A dream," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It was just a goddamn dream." I laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. I swung my legs out of bed. I needed a drink. I needed to wash the taste of copper out of my mouth. I walked to the bathroom. I turned on the tap, splashing cold water on my face. It felt good. It felt real. I grabbed a towel and dried off. Then I looked in the mirror. My reflection was staring back at me, but it wasn't drying its face. My reflection was standing perfectly still. Its eyes were pitch black, and in its right hand it held a gleaming, rusted meat cleaver. I froze, the towel dropping from my hands. My reflection smiled, and then it winked. From the woods behind the trailer, faint but unmistakable, the Calliope music began to play. Asterisk. Do-do-do-do. Asterisk. The sound of the Calliope wasn't just in the air, it was vibrating in the porcelain of the sink, humming through the soles of my feet. My reflection's smile widened, stretching past the limits of human anatomy. The skin at the corners of its mouth tore with a dry, papery sound, revealing not muscle, but darkness. The cleaver in the glass raised higher. I scrambled backward, my heels catching on the bath mat. I hit the doorframe hard, the impact jarring my teeth, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the mirror. The reflection brought the cleaver down. It didn't hit the reflected me. It hit the glass. Crack. A spiderweb fracture exploded outward from the center of the mirror, right where the blade had struck from the other side. Shards of silver glass didn't fall into the sink. They jutted outward toward me, suspended in the air by some unseen tension. A drop of blood, dark, thick, and utterly real, oozed from the crack, sliding down the pristine surface of the mirror I had just cleaned. "No," I whispered, the words scraping against a throat that suddenly felt lined with sandpaper. "I'm awake. I'm awake, goddammit." I looked down at the sink. The water I had just splashed on my face was still running, but the sound had changed. It was no longer the crisp splash of tap water. It was a heavy, gloopy plop, plop, plop. The liquid swirling down the drain wasn't clear. It was a translucent, bile yellow fluid, viscous and steaming. The smell hit me a second later, a concoction of ammonia, sulfur, and the sweet, cloying scent of funeral lilies. I shut off the tap. The handle felt soft under my grip, warm and yielding, like grabbing a handful of raw dough. I recoiled, wiping my hand on my jeans. My palm came away smeared with a gray, greasy residue. Get out, I told myself. Just get out of the trailer. I turned and stumbled into the narrow hallway. The sunlight streaming from the living room window had shifted. It was no longer the bright, dusty gold of an October morning. It had taken on a bruised purple hue, like light filtering through a hematoma. The floor beneath my bare feet felt wrong. The linoleum was there, the familiar checkered pattern I'd hated for years, but the structure underneath had lost its rigidity. With every step, the floor bowed and squished, as if the wood had rotted away to leave only a layer of skin over a bed of peat moss. Squelch, squelch. I reached the living room. My eyes darted to the front door, the escape route, but then they snagged on the walls. The wood paneling was sweating. Beads of condensation, thick and oily, rolled down the fake rain. The photos I had taped up, Polaroids of old friends, a calendar from the local auto shop were curling, the images bleeding. The faces in the pictures were running, their features sliding off their skulls like melted wax. I grabbed the doorknob. It was scorching hot, vibrating with the same manic rhythm as the Calliope music outside. I hissed, using the hem of my t-shirt to twist it. The door groaned, the hinges screaming like a dying animal, and swung open. I burst out onto the metal steps, gasping for fresh air, but the air wasn't fresh. It tasted of copper and ozone, heavy with the static charge of an approaching storm. I stood on the stoop, gripping the railing, trying to process what I was seeing. It was the trailer park, my trailer park, but it had been processed through a filter of madness. The layout was the same. The gravel road looped around the central patch of dying grass. The other trailers sat in their usual spots, but the proportions were distorted. The trailers looked elongated, stretching upward like funhouse reflections. The windows were too high, resembling surprised black eyes. And the trees, the oaks that lined the perimeter of the park, were devoid of leaves. Their bark was slick and black, glistening as if coated in tar. The branches didn't sway in the wind. They twitched, jerky, spasmodic movements, like the legs of an upturned beetle. Riley? The voice was cheerful, too cheerful. I snapped my head toward the sound. Mrs. Gable, my neighbor 3 lots down, was kneeling in her flower bed. She was a kindly woman in her 60s, always wearing a floral apron and wide-brimmed straw hat. She was wearing them now. But the apron was made of stitched-together scalps, the hair hanging down like tassels, and the hat was woven from dried tendons. She smiled at me. Her teeth were perfect, too white, too straight, and far too many of them. "Lovely morning for a harvest, isn't it?" she chirped. I looked down at her garden. She wasn't planting petunias. She was digging in the gray, ash-like soil with a trowel made of bone. In the furrows she had already dug, she was planting fingers, human fingers, severed at the knuckle, pointing straight up. Some of them were twitching, the nails scratching at the air. "Mrs. Gable," I choked out. "Just call me Ma, dear. Everyone does at the show." She patted the soil around a particularly thick thumb. "You look pale, Riley. Didn't you sleep well? The generator was a bit loud last night." The generator... I listened past the Calliope music. Beneath the piping organ notes, there was a low, subterranean thrumming, a rhythmic, mechanical pounding that shook the fillings in my teeth. It was coming from beneath the ground. The entire trailer park was sitting on top of a machine. "Where is she?" I demanded, stepping off the porch. The gravel felt like crushed teeth under my feet. "Where is Jenny?" Mrs. Gable giggled. It was a wet, bubbling sound. She pointed with the bone trowel toward the woods at the edge of the park. "She went to get her ticket punched, silly. The matinee is starting." I looked toward the tree line. The shadows between the blackened trunks were impossibly deep, and within that darkness I saw the flicker of lights. Red, green, yellow, chasing lights. And the sign, it hung suspended between two massive, dead trees, swaying gently in a wind I couldn't feel. The paint was peeling, revealing rusted metal underneath, but the words were legible, glowing with a faint, phosphorescent decay. "Carnival of Mirrors, 1 soul children under 12, eat free." I looked back at Mrs. Gable, but she was gone. In her place was a mound of raw hamburger meat, shaped roughly like a woman, collapsing in on itself in the heat. The straw hat sat atop the pile, slowly sinking into the gore. I turned and ran, not away from the woods, but toward them. The logic of the nightmare had taken hold of me again. Running away didn't work. The only way out was through. The only way to stop the grinder was to jam the gears. As I sprinted across the gravel, the ground began to change. The stones softened, turning into sawdust. The air grew hotter, stifling, smelling of popcorn and old sweat. I hit the tree line. The transition was instant. One moment I was in the distorted trailer park. The next, I was standing on a wooden boardwalk. The sky overhead was gone, replaced by a massive, tattered canvas tent that stretched to the horizon, blocking out the sun. The light came from thousands of buzzing, flickering bulbs strung up on frayed wires. I was in the Midway again. But it was different from before. Before, it had been chaotic, a riot of violence. Now, it was oddly organized. Booths lined the boardwalk, staffed by figures in shadows. There were no screams, only the murmuring of a crowd. I looked around. There were people here, dozens of them, shuffling along the boardwalk, their heads bowed. They wore gray rags. Their feet were bare and bloody. I grabbed the arm of a man shuffling past me. "Hey, where are we?" The man stopped and slowly lifted his head. His face was a blank slate. No eyes, no nose, just a mouth that had been sewn shut with heavy twine. He didn't make a sound. He just pointed a trembling finger down the boardwalk toward the center of the tent. There, rising like a cathedral of iron and pain, was a new structure. It wasn't the Ferris wheel. It wasn't the House of Mirrors. It was a stage. A massive wooden platform elevated 10 feet off the ground, surrounded by red velvet curtains that dripped fluid onto the sawdust. And standing center stage, bathed in a spotlight that seemed to burn the air, was a microphone stand. The microphone was a human hand, fingers curled into a fist, holding a jagged shard of glass. "Welcome back, Riley," a voice whispered. It didn't come from the stage. It came from inside my own ear, intimate and wet. I slapped the side of my head, stumbling. "Did you miss us? We missed you. The flesh is lonely without the knife." I looked down at my side. The phantom pain in my ribs flared into agony. A dark stain was spreading across my t-shirt. I lifted the hem. The gash was there, but it wasn't bleeding blood anymore. It was bleeding sawdust. Fine, dry wood dust pouring out of my body like an hourglass. "What are you doing to me?" I screamed at the empty air. "Refining you," the voice purred, "making you part of the exhibit. You were too soft, too wet. We need structure." A spotlight snapped on, blinding me. It hit me squarely in the chest. The crowd of faceless shufflers stopped. In unison, they turned toward me. Then, they began to clap. It was a slow, wet applause. The sound of meat slapping against meat. Clap. Squelch, clamp, squelch. From behind the red velvet curtains on the stage, a shape began to emerge. It wasn't the barker. This was something else, something older. It moved on 4 limbs, scuttling like a spider, but its limbs were human arms, broken at the elbows and knees to allow for quadrupedal movement. It was wrapped in bandages that were yellow with age. It wore a porcelain mask, the face of a Trubik doll, rosy-cheeked and smiling. But the mask was cracked down the center, and through the fissure a long purple tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "The contortionist," I whispered. The creature leaped from the stage. It didn't land. It grabbed the support beams with its hands and feet, clinging to the wood, staring at me upside down. "Riley wants his Jenny," the contortionist hissed. Its voice was high and reedy, like a bow drawn across a violin string made of gut. Riley wants to be a hero. It dropped to the boardwalk, landing silently on all 4s. It cocked its head, the porcelain mask gleaming. But first, it giggled. "We have to see if you fit inside the box." It reached behind its back, an impossible, joint-popping motion, and produced a small, ornate box. It was tiny, no bigger than a jewelry case. "Jenny fit?" the contortionist said. "Mostly?" It shook the box. Something inside rattled. Something wet and heavy. "Give her back." I looked around for a weapon. The wrench was gone. I had left it in the dream, no, the memory of the grinder. I was unarmed. I looked at the booth next to me. It was a game of chance. Ring toss. But the rings were rusted bear traps, and the bottles were human femurs stuck upright in the wood. I grabbed one of the femurs. It was heavy, calcified, the marrow seemingly replaced with lead. The contortionist shrieked with laughter. "Bones! He likes bones! We have plenty of bones, Riley." It lunged. It was faster than the barker. It was a blur of bandages and porcelain. I swung the bone club, but the creature twisted in midair, its spine bending at a 90-degree angle to avoid the blow. It landed on my chest, pinning me to the boardwalk. Its weight was immense. I felt my ribs, the ones that were already leaking sawdust, creak under the pressure. The porcelain face was inches from mine. I could smell its breath, mothballs and formaldehyde. "Open wide," it whispered. The purple tongue shot out, wrapping around my throat, squeezing. I gagged, thrashing, trying to buck it off. But its grip was iron. As my vision began to tunnel, I saw something over the contortionist's shoulder. One of the faceless spectators had stepped forward. He wasn't clapping anymore. He reached into his gray rags and pulled out an object. It was a lighter. A simple silver Zippo. He flicked it open. The flame flared, orange and pure. The spectator looked at me, or where his eyes would have been, and then looked at the sawdust pouring out of my side. He tilted his head. Then he threw the lighter at me. It tumbled through the air in slow motion, the flame dancing. The contortionist saw it too late. It shrieked, trying to scramble off me. The lighter hit the pile of sawdust pooling next to my ribs. Whoosh! The dust caught instantly. But it didn't burn like wood. It burned with a cold, blue chemical fire. The flames roared up my side, engulfing the contortionist's bandages. The creature screamed, a high, piercing sound that shattered the light bulbs overhead. It leaped off me, flailing, a ball of blue fire rolling down the boardwalk. I scrambled backward, padding at my side. The fire wasn't burning me. It was cauterizing the wound, sealing the sawdust inside. The heat was intense, but it felt cleansing. The contortionist crashed into a booth, setting the canvas alight. The fire spread instantly, jumping from tent to tent. "Fire!" someone screamed. But it wasn't a scream of terror. It was a scream of excitement. Fire in the hole. The faceless crowd erupted into chaos. They weren't fleeing. They were running toward the flames, throwing themselves into the bonfires, laughing as they burned. I scrambled to my feet. The boardwalk was becoming an inferno. I had to get to the stage behind the curtain. That's where the contortionist had come from. That's where the darkness was deepest. I covered my face with my arm and ran through the smoke. The smell of burning sugar and burning hair was overpowering. I vaulted onto the stage. The heat was blistering here. The velvet curtains were already smoldering. I grabbed the heavy fabric and tore it aside. There was no backstage. There was a hallway. A long, sterile hospital corridor with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and a checkered linoleum floor. My trailer's hallway. But at the end of this hallway, there wasn't a bedroom. There was a massive steel door, like the door to a bank vault or a meat locker. And on the door, painted in red lipstick, was a single word. Manager. I walked down the corridor. The sounds of the burning carnival faded behind me, replaced by the hum of the fluorescence. I reached the door. It had no handle, only a small glass viewing port. I leaned in and looked through the glass. Inside, sitting behind a mahogany desk, was a man. He looked normal. He wore a crisp gray suit. He was writing in a ledger with a fountain pen. He stopped writing. He didn't look up. "You're late, Riley," he said. His voice was muffled by the steel, but I heard it clearly. He slowly lifted his head. It was me, not a reflection, not a monster. It was me, 10 years older, eyes tired and sunken. "I've been keeping the books for a long time," the older Riley said, "and you're deep in the red." He pressed a button on his desk. The floor beneath me dropped out. I didn't just fall, I was swallowed. The floor tiles retracted with a mechanical hiss, and I plunged into a throat of greased sheet metal. The darkness was absolute, heavy and suffocating, pressing against my eyes like a physical weight. I slid. The angle was steep, a spiral intestine that wound down into the bowels of the nightmare. The metal was hot against my back, searing the skin through my t-shirt. I flailed, my fingers scrabbling against the smooth, oily walls, finding no purchase. The air rushing past me didn't smell like the hospital corridor anymore. It smelled of wet fur, rusted iron, and the sickly sweet rot of pumpkins left too long in the sun. The slide curved sharply, slamming my shoulder against the metal with a bone-jarring crunch. I cried out, the sound swallowed by the rushing wind. The sensation of speed was nauseating, a vertigo that seemed to pull my stomach up through my throat. Then the chute ended. I was ejected into empty space. For a heartbeat, I was weightless, suspended in a void of damp air. Then came the impact. I didn't hit concrete. I didn't hit water. I crashed into a mountain of limbs. The sound was a dry, hollow clatter, like 1,000 bowling pins striking each other at once. I tumbled down the slope of the pile, plastic and wood digging into my flesh, before coming to a rest at the bottom. I lay there, gasping. The wind knocked out of me. My side, where the blue fire had cauterized the sawdust wound, throbbed with a dull, aching pressure. I pushed myself up on trembling arms. My hand closed around something cold and smooth. I brought it close to my face. The light down here was dim, filtering from somewhere high above, through grates that dripped sludge, casting everything in a sickly, green phosphorescence. I was holding a hand, a mannequin hand. I looked around, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. I was in a cavern. The ceiling was lost in the shadows above, a tangle of pipes and dripping chains, but the floor was a graveyard. I had landed on a refuse pile that stretched for acres. It was a chaotic jumble of carnival debris, cracked fiberglass horse heads from a carousel, their eyes painted wide in eternal panic, tangles of blackened fairy lights that looked like burnt nerve endings, piles of stiff, moth-eaten clown suits, and dolls, thousands of them. Some were porcelain, shattered into shards. Some were plastic, melted by heat. Some were stuffed cloth, torn open to reveal stuffing that looked suspiciously like the sawdust inside me. Garbage, I rasped. My voice sounded small in the vast echoing chamber. It's just garbage. Is it? The voice in my head whispered. It sounded weaker now, distant, as if the fall had jarred it loose. Look closer, Riley. Nothing is wasted here. I scrambled off the pile, my boots sinking into a carpet of soggy ticket stubs. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of ozone. I needed to move. If the manager was above keeping the books, then this must be the inventory he had written off. The bad debts. I started walking, picking my way through the wreckage. To my left, a mountain of rusted bumper cars was stacked like crushed beetles. To my right, a river of black sludge flowed sluggishly through a trench, carrying debris with it. Something splashed in the sludge. I froze. The ripples spread outward, disturbing the oily sheen of the water. A head surfaced. It was made of tin. A dented, rusted metal bucket with holes punched out for eyes and a jagged slit for a mouth. It had no body that I could see, just a head bobbing in the filth. It rotated slowly, the metal grinding against itself, until the eye holes fixed on me. Ticket? It gurgled. The voice was wet, bubbling up through the sludge. I took a step back. I don't have a ticket. The tin head sank slightly, then rose again. No ticket, no ride, no exit. Where is this? I demanded. Where's Jenny? Jenny. The name rattled inside the tin head like a pebble. Jenny is in the sorting. Jenny is being processed. Jenny is raw material. Where? I screamed, stepping toward the edge of the sludge river. The tin head tilted back. Follow the belts. Follow the grinder. But watch out for the scrappers. They don't like unauthorized salvage. With a final bubbling bloop, the head sank beneath the black water. Follow the belts? I looked up. High above the river of sludge, huge conveyor belts crisscrossed the darkness. They were moving, carrying shapeless lumps of matter toward a distant, rhythmic thumping sound. Thump hiss? Thump hiss? It sounded like a mechanical heart. Or a press. I began to run, following the direction of the sludge river, keeping the conveyor belts in sight. The ground beneath me became treacherous, slick with oil and scattered with sharp debris. I passed a cage made of shopping carts, lashed together with barbed wire. Inside, something whimpered. I didn't stop to look. I couldn't. The fear was a cold engine in my chest, driving me forward. The thumping grew louder. The air grew warmer, thick with the smell of hot grease and singed hair. I rounded a corner, navigating around a massive, toppled statue of a smiling clown, and stopped dead. I had found the sorting. It was a factory floor, but one designed by a madman. In the center of the space was a massive machine, a towering construct of brass gears, pistons, and spinning blades. The conveyor belts fed into it, dropping their loads into a central hopper. I watched, horrified, as a pile of gray rags, the clothes of the faceless spectators from above, tumbled into the hopper. The machine roared. Gears ground together. Steam hissed from vents that looked like screaming mouths. And from the bottom of the machine, onto a new belt, dropped a product. Red bricks. Perfectly rectangular, wet, red bricks. But they weren't clay. They were meat, compressed, shaped, uniform blocks of flesh. I gagged, covering my mouth. Structure, the voice whispered. We need structure. The carnival is built on blood, Riley. Literally. No, I moaned. I scanned the factory floor. Creatures were moving among the belts. They were the scrappers. They were short, hunched figures, wearing aprons made of thick, black rubber. They wore welding masks that obscured their faces. In their hands, they held long poles, tipped with glowing, red-hot hooks. They were poking at the belts, sorting the debris. If they saw something they didn't like, they hooked it and threw it onto the floor. I saw one scrapper hook a struggling Muling thing. It looked like a dog with a human hand for a tail, and toss it casually into a furnace grate. I had to get past them. The conveyor belts continued out the other side of the machine, disappearing into a tunnel labeled assembly. If Jenny was being processed, if she was raw material, I couldn't finish the thought. I crouched behind the toppled clown statue, looking for a route. The floor was open, exposed. The scrappers were everywhere, their welding masks reflecting the sparks from the grinder. I needed a distraction. My hand brushed against the clown statue's pocket. It was hard plaster, but there was a hole in it. I reached inside. My fingers touched something cold and metallic. I pulled it out. It was a wind-up key. Heavy, brass, the size of my palm. I looked at the statue. In the center of its back, between the shoulder blades of its polka-dot suit, was a keyhole. I looked at the scrappers. They were methodical, slow, but there were dozens of them. I jammed the key into the clown's back. It fit perfectly. I began to turn it. Click, click, click. The sound was loud in the ambient roar of the factory. A scrapper nearby froze. Its welding mask turned toward me. I cranked harder. The spring inside the statue groaned, tight and angry. Click, 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 click. The scrapper let out a low, metallic hoot. It raised its hook and started shuffling toward the clown statue. "Come on," I whispered, sweat stinging my eyes. I gave the key one final, wrenching twist and pulled it out. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the clown statue shuddered. Its painted eyes rolled back in its head, revealing pure white orbs. Its jaw unhinged, dropping open to reveal a speaker grill in its throat. And then it began to laugh. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was amplified, distorted, a sonic weapon of manic glee. Ha 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 ha, oh boy. Look at the time. Look at the time. The statue began to vibrate violently, clattering against the metal debris. Its plaster arms flailed, smashing into the rusted bumper cars. Everybody loves a clown, honk honk. The sound echoed through the cavern, deafening. Every scrapper on the floor stopped. In unison, they turned toward the noise. They shrieked a sound like grinding metal and charged the statue. They swarmed it, their hooks flashing, tearing at the plaster, trying to silence the laughter. I didn't wait to watch them dismantle it. I broke cover, sprinting low to the ground. I kept to the shadows of the machinery, my boots skidding on the greasy floor. The laughter of the clown followed me, mixing with the screeching of the scrappers and the rhythmic thump hiss of the meat press. I reached the conveyor belt leading to assembly. It was moving fast, carrying the red bricks of meat into the dark tunnel. I couldn't walk on the floor anymore. The tunnel was elevated. I had to ride the belt. I grabbed the metal railing and vaulted up. My feet landed on the rubber belt. It was slick with blood and fluid. I slipped, falling to my knees, my hands squishing into a wet, red brick. I recoiled, wiping my hands on my jeans, but the stain remained. The belt carried me forward. The noise of the factory began to fade, replaced by the humming of the belt and the rushing wind of the tunnel. I was moving deeper into the machine. The tunnel was narrow. Pipes hissed overhead, dripping condensation that burned where it touched my skin. I lay flat on the belt, trying to make myself as small as possible, squeezed between two blocks of compressed flesh. "You're part of the supply chain now," the voice noted. "Just another brick in the wall." "Shut up," I whispered. The tunnel opened up. I lifted my head. I was in a new chamber. This one was freezing cold. Breath misted in the air. It looked like a dollhouse, but a dollhouse built for giants. The walls were painted a cheerful nursery pink, but the paint was peeling, revealing rusted iron beneath. There were massive blocks of wood scattered around, and oversized tools, hammers the size of cars, needles the length of spears. And in the center of the room, suspended from the ceiling by chains, was a cage. It was the box, the small, ornate box the contortionist had held, but it wasn't small anymore. Here, perspective was broken. The box was huge, the size of a shipping container. It was hanging over a vat of bubbling, translucent liquid plastic. "Jenny," I breathed. I scrambled to my feet, balancing on the moving belt. The belt ended here, dropping the meat bricks into a chute that led elsewhere. I couldn't go down that chute. I had to jump. There was a catwalk running along the perimeter of the room, about 10 feet from the end of the belt. I timed it. Thump, thump, thump. I waited for the belt to lurch forward. I ran. I reached the edge of the belt and launched myself into the freezing air. My fingers caught the railing of the catwalk. The metal was icy, slippery with frost. I slammed into the grating. The breath knocked out of me again. My ribs screamed. I hung there, dangling over the floor of the giant nursery. Below me, shapes were moving in the shadows. Things that looked like half-assembled dolls, dragging themselves with unmatched limbs. I pulled myself up, groaning, and rolled onto the catwalk. I looked at the hanging cage. It was about 50 feet away, suspended in the center of the room. There was no bridge to it, only the chains holding it up, which disappeared into the darkness of the ceiling. But there was a crane, a massive, rusted gantry crane, sat on rails near me. Its control booth was dark. I ran to the crane. The door to the booth was jammed. I kicked it, the wood splintering. It gave way. I climbed inside. The controls were simple, levers and buttons, oversized and clunky. I grabbed the lever marked hoist. I pulled it. Sparks showered from the ceiling. The crane groaned, a sound like a dying whale. Slowly, agonizingly, the crane arm began to move. The hook swung out toward the cage. I needed to snag the cage's chain and pull it over to the catwalk. I manipulated the levers, sweating despite the cold. The hook swung closer, closer. Clang. It hit the chain. I engaged the winch. The cable tightened. The cage lurched. And then a voice came from inside the box, amplified by the acoustics of the room. "Riley?" It was her. It was Jenny. "I'm here," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I'm getting you out." "Riley, don't," she screamed. "Don't open it." "What? Why?" It's not just me in here." Before I could ask what she meant, the door to the oversized box exploded outward. It wasn't pushed. It was shattered. Something stepped out onto the narrow ledge of the open box, balancing over the vat of boiling plastic. It looked like Jenny. It wore her jeans, her favorite band t-shirt, it had her hair, but her face was a kaleidoscope. It was shifting, rotating. 1 second it was Jenny. The next it was the barker. The next it was me. The next it was a screaming skull, and attached to her back, fused to her spine, was a massive ticking mechanism. A brass key turning slowly. Click, click, click. "Riley," the thing with Jenny's voice said. It smiled, and the smile split its face from ear to ear, revealing rows of needle teeth. Playtime. It leaped. It cleared the 50 feet between the box and the catwalk in a single, impossible bound. It landed on the crane arm, denting the steel. I scrambled back in the control booth, looking for a weapon. There was nothing but a heavy wrench on the floor. I grabbed it. The Jenny thing crawled down the crane arm, moving like a lizard. its limbs twisted at wrong angles. "You wanted to be a hero," it hissed, its face shifting into my mother's face, then back to Jenny's. "Heroes have to make sacrifices." It lunged at the glass of the control booth. Smash. Glass shards rained down on me. I swung the wrench blindly. It connected with a wet thud. The creature shrieked, recoiling. I didn't wait. I kicked the door open and scrambled out onto the catwalk, running back toward the conveyor belt tunnel. "Run, Riley, run!" The creature laughed. It sounded like a child's toy running low on batteries. Slow, deep, demonic. I looked back. It was gathering itself to pounce. I saw the vat of liquid plastic below. I saw the controls on the wall next to me. Emergency flush. I didn't think. I hit the button. A siren wailed. The floor of the nursery opened up. The vat of plastic didn't drain. It erupted. Geysers of hot, translucent goo shot up, spraying the room. The Jenny thing screamed as the hot plastic hit it. It sizzled, melting the skin, fusing the clothes to the flesh. It fell from the railing, tumbling down into the rising tide of plastic. I turned and ran. The heat was rising instantly. The plastic was filling the room, hardening as it cooled, turning everything into a permanent, glossy exhibit. I dove back into the conveyor tunnel just as the plastic wave crashed against the catwalk, sealing the entrance. I lay on the belt, panting, staring back at the wall of cooling plastic that had just formed. I was safe. For now, but I had seen the key in her back. "She's not gone," the voice whispered. "You can't kill a memory, Riley. You can only repress it." I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. The red stain from the meat brick was gone. My hands were covered in plastic. A thin, translucent sheen. I flexed my fingers. The plastic didn't crack. It stretched. I touched my face. It felt smooth? Too smooth. "No," I whispered. I clawed at my cheek. The skin peeled away, but there was no blood underneath. Just smooth, white porcelain. "Welcome to the dollhouse," the voice giggled. "You're fitting in nicely." The conveyor belt lurched, carrying me faster now, toward the light at the end of the tunnel. And in that light, I saw a silhouette. A man in a top hat. The Barker. He was waiting for me. And he was holding a paintbrush. The conveyor belt didn't stop. It hummed with a vibration that rattled my bones, or what was left of them. I kept clawing at my cheek. The panic was a cold, sharp spike in my chest, far worse than the fear of the monsters. Monsters you can run from. You can hide from claws and teeth, but you cannot run when the monster is your own skin. Scritch, scritch. My fingernails still dirty, still human, rimmed with grime, skated uselessly over the white surface of my face. It sounded like a fork scraping a dinner plate. I pressed harder. I wanted blood. I wanted the hot, wet reassurance of a wound. I wanted pain. Instead, a flake of white chipped off. It fluttered down to the black rubber of the belt. It wasn't skin. It was a shard of ceramic, sharp and curved. Beneath it, where the raw meat of my cheek should have been, there was only darkness. A hollow, unpainted void. "Don't pick at it," the voice chided, sounding like a strict governess. "You'll ruin the finish." "Get out of my head," I croaked. My voice sounded wrong. It was tinny, resonant, like I was speaking inside a jar. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt dry. Not thirsty dry, dusty. I coughed, and a puff of fine, yellow powder expelled from my lips. Sawdust. I stared at the powder settling on my jeans. My stomach didn't churn. It felt stiff, static. The light ahead grew blinding. The tunnel walls, previously damp and rusted, smoothed out. They became draped in heavy red velvet curtains, swaying in a wind that didn't exist. The air changed to The stench of burning plastic and slaughterhouse rot vanished, replaced by the overwhelming chemical stink of turpentine, varnish, and stale popcorn. The belt began to slow. I tried to scramble backward, to retreat into the darkness, but my limbs were heavy. My knee joints clicked audibly, a dry talk as I bent them. My movements were jerky, lacking fluidity. I was stiffening, curing. The belt terminated. It didn't drop me into a chute this time. It ended flush against a stage made of polished mahogany. I tumbled off, my porcelain hands clacking against the wood. I couldn't break my fall properly. My elbows were locked. I slid across the varnished floor, coming to a rest at the excruciatingly shiny tip of a black leather boot. I looked up. The perspective was dizzying. He seemed 10 feet tall, stretched by the warped reality of this place. The barker looked down at me. Up close. The glamour of his distance faded, revealing the grotesque details of his construction. His top hat was made of stitched human skin, dyed a midnight black, but retaining the poor texture. His tailcoat was a patchwork of velvet and dried veins, but his face was a masterpiece of wrongness. It was too powdery. The white makeup was caked into deep fissures. His eyes weren't eyes, they were glass spheres, swirling with nebula-like colors, pinned into sockets that were slightly too wide. And he held the paintbrush. It was long, slender, dripping with a viscous red liquid that smelled like copper. "Riley," the barker said. His voice didn't come from a throat. It seemed to emanate from the air around him, a surround sound boom of baritone charisma. "You're late for your sitting, but... oh, look at you. You've already applied the base coat yourself." I tried to push myself up. My arms trembled, the ceramic joints grinding. "What did you do to me?" I rasped. The sound was like two stones rubbing together. The barker smiled. His lips didn't part naturally. They stretched, the makeup cracking at the corners. "Do? I did nothing, my boy. I merely provided the canvas. You are the artist of your own degradation. Every fear, every repressed memory, every time you looked away from the truth. You were sculpting yourself." He crouched down. The movement was fluid, oily, contrasting sharply with my own rigid jerkiness. He reached out with a gloved hand and tilted my chin up. His grip was iron. I couldn't look away from those glass eyes. "But the expression is all wrong," he tutted. "Too much despair. Not enough whimsy." He brought the brush closer. "Don't," I said, or tried to. My jaw felt fused. I could barely open my mouth. Hush, now. Art requires stillness." He touched the brush to my face. It wasn't paint. It was liquid fire. I screamed, but the sound was muffled, trapped behind the porcelain barrier. The barker painted a line from the corner of my mouth, sweeping it up toward my ear. He was painting a smile. Every stroke burned, searing the false skin, branding me. He worked with agonizing slowness, humming a tune that sounded vaguely like "Pop Goes the Weasel" played at half speed. "There," he whispered, pulling the brush back. "Much better. Now you look happy. Now you look like you belong." He stood up, towering over me again. He snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the stage curtains, a mirror rolled out. It was an oval vanity mirror, framed in bone. "Take a look," the barker commanded. I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. But my head turned. I wasn't controlling it anymore. The strings were being pulled. I looked into the glass. I didn't see Riley. I saw a doll. My skin was a flawless, gleaming white. My hair was synthetic, glued in rigid clumps. My eyes were painted on wide, terrified pupils trapped in permanent shock. And the smile, the red, jagged smile the barker had painted cut across my face, a bleeding wound of forced joy. But the worst part wasn't the face. It was the chest. My shirt was torn open. My chest cavity was exposed. There were no ribs, no heart, no lungs, Inside my hollow porcelain torso, there was a complex arrangement of brass gears, springs, and pulleys, and in the center, where my heart should have been, sat a small, rusted bird cage. Inside the cage, something small and shriveled was beating feebly against the bars. It looked like a human heart, but tiny, atrophied. "That's the last of you," the voice whispered. It sounded sad now, the last little bit of Riley. I stared at the mirror, paralyzed by the image. "Beautiful," the barker murmured, admiring his handiwork, "but incomplete." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a screwdriver. It was long, rusty, and coated in dried gristle. "You're running a bit loose in the joints," he said, tapping the screwdriver against his palm. "We need to tighten you up before the show. The audience hates a floppy puppet." He took a step toward me. Panic, primal and desperate, finally surged hot enough to override the stiffness. I rolled. My shoulder hit the wood hard, cracking the porcelain there, sending a spiderweb fracture down my arm. I didn't care. I scrambled onto my hands and knees, clack, 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 and lunged away from him. "Oh," the barker sounded amused. "Stage fright?" I ran. I didn't run like a man. I ran like a dog, on slippery floors, my limbs flailing, my coordination shot. I headed for the side of the stage, toward the heavy velvet curtains. "There are no exits, Riley," the barker called out, his voice booming like thunder. "Only scene changes." I crashed into the curtains. They were heavy, dusty, smelling of old attics. I fought through them, the fabric clinging to my glossy skin. I burst through to the other side. I wasn't backstage. I was outside, or what passed for outside in this hell. I was standing on a narrow wooden plank, suspended over an abyss. Above, the sky was a bruised purple, devoid of stars. Below, a thick, yellow fog churned, obscuring whatever lay at the bottom of the pit. And, rising from the fog, stretching up into the purple gloom, was a Ferris wheel. It was colossal. The skeleton of it looked like it was made from the bones of leviathans. The cars were cages, rusting and swaying in the stagnant air, and it was screaming. The metal groaned as it turned, but beneath that, the axles shrieked with a sound that was unmistakably human. I looked back. The curtains I had come through were hanging in empty space, attached to a door frame that stood on the edge of the plank. The barker stepped through the frame. He had to duck to fit. He twirled the screwdriver in his fingers. "The Wheel of Fortune," he said, gesturing to the monstrosity with a paintbrush. "Round and round it goes, where it stops." "Well, it never stops, Riley. That's the joke." I backed away, the heels of my boots teetering on the edge of the plank. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracked, the porcelain vibrating. "You have two choices," the barker said, walking slowly along the plank. He had the balance of a tightrope walker. "You let me finish my work. You let me tighten those screws, oil those gears, and make you perfect. You stay here, in the limelight, forever young, forever smiling." He pointed the screwdriver at my chest, at the little cage where my shriveled heart beat. Or he continued, his glass eyes narrowing, "You take your chances with the wheel. You join the raw materials, the unfinished business." I looked at the wheel as a car swung past. Close to the plank, I saw what was inside. It wasn't empty. It was a man, or part of one. He was fused to the bars of the cage, his flesh melted around the iron. He was weeping, but he had no mouth, only a slit that bubbled. I looked at the barker. He was 5 feet away. I looked at my hands, shining, white, hard. I clenched them into fists. I couldn't feel my fingernails digging into my palms anymore. I only felt pressure. "I'm not your puppet," I said. The barker sighed. A puff of grave dust escaped his lips. "Everyone is a puppet, Riley. Some of us just see the strings." He lunged. He was fast, impossibly fast. The screwdriver flashed, aiming for my eye. I didn't dodge. I couldn't. My reflexes were too slow. Instead, I raised my arm. Crack. The screwdriver slammed into my forearm. It didn't pierce flesh. It shattered the porcelain shell. Shards of white ceramic exploded outward. Beneath the shell, there was no blood. There was wood, pale, unfinished pine. The screwdriver was wedged deep into the wood of my arm. The barker paused, looking at the wound. He looked delighted. Pine, he crowed. Sturdy, reliable. A bit common, but we can work with it. He yanked the screwdriver free. I didn't feel pain. I felt a dull thud, a vibration that traveled up my shoulder. I used the momentum. I swung my other arm, my rigid, heavy porcelain and wood arm like a club. It connected with the barker's face. It was like hitting a bag of wet sand. His head snapped back. His top hat went flying, tumbling into the abyss. For a second, the glamour flickered. I saw beneath the makeup. I saw the rot. I saw the maggots writhing in the sockets of his eyes. He stumbled, his boot slipping on the edge of the plank. "You ungrateful little brat!" he roared, his voice losing its theatrical reverb and becoming a guttural wet gurgle. He swiped at me with the paintbrush. The red liquid splattered across my chest, burning through my shirt, sizzling against the brass gears inside me. The heat was intense. I could feel the little heart in the cage fluttering wildly, terrified by the proximity of the fire. I couldn't win this. Not here. Not on his stage. The Ferris wheel car was swinging closer. It was coming up from the fog, rising toward the apex of its arc. It was empty. I calculated the distance. It was far, too far for a human. But I wasn't human anymore. I was pine and porcelain and springs. I resign, I said. The barker lunged again. Teeth bared rows of rusted nails where incisors should be. I turned and jumped. I launched myself off the plank into the purple void. The wind rushed past me, whistling through the cracks in my face. I reached out with my heavy, stiff hands. My fingers hooked onto the rusted bars of the passing cage. The impact was brutal. My shoulder wrenched with a sickening crack of wood splitting. My grip slipped on the wet metal. I dangled there, feet kicking over the abyss. Above me, on the receding plank, the barker stood silhouette against the stage light. He was screaming, shaking his fist, shrinking into the distance. I pulled. My mechanical muscles whined. My wooden bones groaned. Slowly, I hauled myself up and tumbled onto the floor of the cage. The metal was cold. The air smelled of ozone and despair. The wheel carried me up, higher and higher into the purple sky. I lay on my back, staring up. The crack in my arm was deep. I could see the grain of the wood. I could see a screw loose, vibrating with the motion of the wheel. "You escaped the artist," the voice whispered. "But now you're just part of the ride." "Where does it go?" I asked the empty air. "Nowhere," the voice replied. "It just goes around and around and around." The car crested the top of the wheel, and for a moment I could see the entire factory. It was an endless, sprawling nightmare city of smokestacks, tents, and gears. It stretched to the horizon in every direction. There was no forest. There was no town. There was only the factory. And in the center of it all, miles away, was a massive, beating heart. A biological mountain of flesh pulsating, pumping sludge through arteries of pipe into the various districts. The scrap yard, the nursery, the stage, they were all organs. And I was just a virus moving through the bloodstream. The wheel began its descent, down toward the fog, down toward the screams. I sat up. I looked at the loose screw in my arm. I reached over with my other hand and twisted it. It turned. I wasn't just a doll, I was a machine, and machines could be modified. I looked at the rusted bars of the cage. If I was wood and metal now, maybe I didn't need to break the bars. Maybe I could become the key. I gripped my left index finger with my right hand. The porcelain was cool, smooth as a teacup, but beneath it, I could feel the rigid density of the pine dowel that served as my bone. I twisted. There was a dry, frictional squeak wood turning against wood. It was a sensation devoid of pain, yet it sent a phantom shiver through nerves I no longer possessed. It was a violation of the memory of my body. I kept twisting. Squeak. Grind. Pop. The finger came loose. I held it up. It was a 3-inch segment of jointed ceramic and wood tapering to a perfectly painted fingernail. At the base, a threaded screw protruded from the raw pine. Resourceful, the voice whispered. It sounded hungry, but cannibalizing yourself? That's a slippery slope, Riley. It's just parts. I rasped. My jaw clicked. The hinge there was tight, needing oil. I'm just parts now. I turned to the cage door. The lock was a crude, heavy iron latch, rusted shut by decades of exposure to the damp fog. I jammed the threaded end of my severed finger into the keyhole. It didn't fit perfectly, but the wood was soft enough to deform, to bite into the mechanism. I cranked it. The wheel groaned, the entire colossal structure shuddering as it carried me down into the yellow miasma. The air grew heavy, saturated with moisture that wasn't water. It was oily, tasting of copper and curdled milk. It coated my porcelain skin in a slick, greasy film. Clack, clack. I twisted my makeshift key. The wood of my finger splintered, but the rust inside the lock gave way with a sound like a breaking bone. The latch sprang open, but I didn't push the door yet. We were entering the fog. Visibility dropped to 0. The purple sky vanished, swallowed by the churning yellow soup. The world became a claustrophobic sphere of gray metal and swirling mist. And the sounds changed. The wind died. In its place was a wet, rhythmic slapping sound. Slap, hiss, slap, hiss, like a butcher tenderizing meat on a wet block. A cage passed me on the ascending side, rising out of the depths. It drifted close, swinging violently. I pressed my face to the bars, staring through the gloom. The cage wasn't empty. It held a woman, or what had been a woman. She was naked, but her skin had been replaced by a thick, translucent coating of wax. She was fused to the floor in a kneeling position, her hands clasped in eternal prayer. Her eyes were wide open, staring at me. They were glass, but inside the wax chest, I saw movement, a flutter, a panic. She was alive, in there, enaced, preserved, and silent. The dipping vat, the voice murmured. That's what's at the bottom, Riley. They don't just build you, they glaze you. Seal the cracks, suffocate the scream. My own tiny, shriveled heart gave a violent kick against its cage. The heat from the barker's paintbrush still simmered there, a dull ache in the brass gears. I looked down. The fog was thinning beneath me. We weren't over a pit. We were over a lake. It was a vast, circular reservoir of bubbling white liquid. It glowed with a sickly, pale luminescence, lighting the underbelly of the fog. It looked like milk, but it moved like molten lead. The cages at the very bottom of the wheel's arc were being dragged through it. Hiss-sus-sus. Steam erupted as the cold metal hit the boiling white sludge. The screams I had heard earlier weren't coming from the wheel. They were coming from the things being dipped. I saw a cage emerge. Inside, a creature, some multi-limbed amalgam of dog and child, thrashed wildly. As the air hit the white coating, it hardened instantly. The thrashing slowed, the limbs stiffened. The scream was cut off as the substance calcified over the mouth. In seconds, it was a statue. A perfect, silent lawn ornament ready for the garden. I was next. My cage swung lower. The heat radiating from the vat was intense. I could feel the varnish on my pine skeleton softening, becoming tacky. Not today, I whispered. I kicked the cage door open. It swung out, clanging against the rusted frame. I looked for a place to jump. To the left of the vat, jutting out from the darkness, was a complex network of catwalks and conveyor belts. It was the intake system. Hooks and chains moved along tracks, carrying raw materials, logs, scrap metal, piles of wet bones toward the processing center. It was 20 feet away. A horizontal leap, impossible for a human, but I had springs in my knees. I had pistons in my calves. I climbed onto the edge of the open door. The car swayed precariously over the boiling porcelain. The heat seared the soles of my boots. I crouched, the wood of my legs groaning under the tension. I compressed the heavy coils of steel inside my thighs until they hummed. The wheel turned. The cage dipped. The liquid was 10 feet below. 5 feet! Now, I released the tension. The sound was like a gunshot, the release of kinetic energy snapping through wood and metal. I launched myself into the steam. I flew through the yellow mist, a projectile of ceramic and desperation. For a second, I was weightless. The heat of the vat licked at my back. Then, impact. I crashed onto a moving conveyor belt. I didn't land gracefully. I hit hard, tumbling. My porcelain shell struck steel. Crack. A jagged fracture shot up my left shin. I felt a piece of my face, my cheekbone flake away, sliding across the rubber belt. I scrambled for purchase, my remaining fingers digging into the grime of the belt. It was slick with grease and blood. I lay there for a moment, the machinery thrumming beneath me. The belt was moving away from the vat, carrying me into the bowels of the factory. I pushed myself up. My movements were jerky. The impact had jarred something loose in my spine. My head twitched involuntarily to the left every few seconds. I touched my face. The hole in my cheek was jagged. I could feel my tongue, a strip of rough, dry leather probing the gap. "You're breaking," the voice noted. "You're not factory standard anymore. You're damaged goods." "I'm scrap," I said, stumbling to my feet, "and scrap gets recycled." The conveyor belt moved through a tunnel of corrugated tin. Pipes ran along the ceiling, leaking black oil that sizzled when it hit the floor. Ahead, the tunnel opened up into a cavernous space, the scrapyard. It was a cathedral of refuse. Mountains of broken dolls reached for the darkness above. Heads with missing eyes, torsos with shattered chests, limbs tangled in heaps like kindling. And crawling over the piles were the scavengers. They looked like spiders, but constructed from human hands. Dozens of hands fused together at the wrists to form legs, scurrying around a central body made of a rusted ribcage. They were picking through the piles, searching for usable parts. I froze. The conveyor belt was dumping everything onto a central pile. I looked around. To my right, a rusted ladder climbed the wall of the tunnel, leading up to a maintenance gantry. I lunged for it just as the belt reached the drop-off point. My stiff fingers hooked a rung. I swung off the belt, dangling over the abyss of broken toys. Below me, a torso tumbled off the belt. Immediately, 3 of the hand spiders descended upon it, tearing it apart with frantic, groping fingers, stripping the copper wire from its insides. I climbed, hand over hand. Clack, clack. The ladder vibrated. I looked up. Someone was standing on the gantry, looking down at me. It wasn't a spider. It was a man. He wore a welder's apron made of human skin, thick and leathery. His face was hidden behind a heavy iron mask with a single vertical slit for vision. In his hand, he held a blowtorch that glowed with a blue, hungry flame. He didn't speak. He just tilted his head, the single slit staring at my shattered face, my missing finger, the pine wood exposed beneath my shell. He tapped the nozzle of the blowtorch against the railing. Tink, tink. The toy maker, the voice whispered, trembling. He doesn't make the toys, Riley. He fixes the ones that try to run away. The man raised his hand. He wasn't waving. He was beckoning. Behind him, the gantry led into a maze of pipes and steam. I had nowhere else to go. Down was the scrapie. Ard. Up was the toy maker. I pulled myself onto the gantry. I stood up, towering over the man. My new body was taller than I remembered being, but I felt small. The toy maker pointed his torch at my chest. The blue flame hissed. Lose, he said. His voice was muffled, metallic, like it was coming through a radio with bad reception. You are rattling. I'm leaving, I said. My voice cracked. No, he said. He took a step forward. You are leaking potential. He moved with a terrifying, fluid grace. He wasn't stiff like me. He was oil and muscle. He reached out with his free hand, a hand that was scarred, burned, and massive, and grabbed my fractured arm. I tried to pull away, but his grip was like a vice. Pine, he muttered, inspecting the wound where the screwdriver had been. Soft, porous, absorbs the rot. He brought the blowtorch closer. I can cauterize it, he said. I can replace the wood with iron. I can make you heavy, so heavy you never float away again. I swung my other fist at him. He caught it, effortlessly. Now he held both my arms. He forced them apart, exposing my chest, exposing the little cage where my heart fluttered like a trapped moth. He leaned in, the iron mask inches from my face. I could smell him. He smelled of ozone and scorched hair. That, he said, tapping the blowtorch against the bars of my chest cage. That is the problem. It's weak. It's wet. It rusts the gears. He looked at the blue flame. We should burn it out. Put in a nice, reliable piston engine. Panic flared. Real panic. Not the dull thud of the doll, but the sharp, electric terror of Riley. He's going to kill the last of you, the voice shrieked. I looked at the blowtorch. The flame was mesmerizing. I looked at the toy maker's apron. It was stitched together with coarse black thread, and hanging from his belt, clinking against his hip, was a ring of keys. Complex keys, clockwork keys. Burn it, I said, my voice flat. The toy maker paused. The slit in his mask seemed to widen. Acceptance? Upgrade, I corrected. I want to be strong. He chuckled. A dry, rasping sound. Vanity, the first sin of the puppet. He lowered the torch slightly, loosening his grip on my right arm to adjust the flame intensity. That was the mistake. I didn't pull away. I didn't strike him. I went limp. My knees unlocked. My internal cables went slack. I collapsed straight down, a dead weight of wood and ceramic. The sudden drop broke his grip on my left arm. My right arm slipped through his fingers as I fell. I hit the metal grating of the gantry on my knees, crack, but I was already moving. I didn't stand up. I scuttled forward on 3 limbs, thrusting my right hand, the one with the missing finger, toward his belt. My wooden stump hook snagged the key ring. I yanked. The leather loop snapped. I scrambled back, skittering like a crab, clutching the keys to my chest. The toy maker roared. It wasn't a human sound. It was the sound of a boiler exploding. He swung the blowtorch. A jet of blue fire swept over my head, singing the porcelain of my forehead, turning the paint black. I rolled backward, coming to my feet near the railing. Thief, he bellowed. Unfinished garbage. He charged. I turned and ran. I ran along the gantry, the metal clanging under my heavy boots. The maze of pipes lay ahead. Steam vented in blinding bursts. I entered the steam. I could hear him behind me. Heavy footsteps. The whoosh of the torch. "You can't hide in the machine, Riley," he shouted. "I am the machine." I ducked under a low pipe, my stiff back scraping against the rust. I turned a corner. A dead end. No, not a dead end. A door. A massive, circular steel door, like the hatch of a submarine. It had no handle, only a complex gear-shaped keyhole in the center. I looked at the ring of keys in my hand. There were a dozen shapes. I could hear the toy maker's boots on the metal grating. He was close. I fumbled with the keys. My porcelain fingers were clumsy. "Try the brass one," the voice urged. "The one with the teeth." I jammed the brass key into the hole. It didn't fit. "Found you," the toy maker whispered. I spun around. He was standing at the junction, 10 feet away. The blowtorch was gone. In its place, he held a massive wrench, heavy enough to crush a skull. He began to walk toward me. I turned back to the door. I tried the silver key, too small. The black iron key. It slid in. I turned it. Gears ground inside the door. Heavy tumblers fell into place with thuds that shook the floor. The wheel in the center of the door began to spin. The toy maker lunged. The door swung inward with a groan of pressurized air escaping. I fell through the opening. I didn't land on the floor. I landed on plush carpet? I scrambled up and slammed the door shut. I spun the wheel from the inside, locking the bolts just as a massive impact shook the steel. Bang. "Open it!" the toy maker screamed from the other side. Bang. "You don't belong in there. That is for the management." I backed away, breathing hard or mimicking the motion of breathing. I turned around. The noise of the factory was gone. The smell of ozone and rot was gone. I was in a hallway. It was elegant. The walls were covered in deep crimson wallpaper with gold leaf patterns. Gas lamps flickered on the walls, casting a warm, soft light. The floor was covered in a thick Persian rug that muffled my heavy footsteps. It looked like a hotel corridor or a funeral home. But the silence was heavy. It pressed against my ears. I walked forward. My reflection passed in a gilded mirror on the wall. I looked terrible. My face was cracked, scorched black on one side. My shirt was burned away, revealing the pine ribs. I was missing a finger. I looked like a monster invading a palace. At the end of the hall was a single mahogany desk, and sitting behind the desk was a monkey. It was a toy monkey, the kind with symbols. It wore a little red bellhop's uniform. It was perfectly still. As I approached, its head snapped up. Its mechanical eyes whirred, focusing on me. It didn't crash its symbols. It reached under the desk and pulled out a ledger. It opened the book, picked up a quill pen, and looked at me expectantly. "Don't give it your name," the voice warned. "Names have power here." "Where am I?" I asked. The monkey didn't speak. It tapped the page with the quill. I looked at the page. It was a list of names. Thousands of them. Most were crossed out in red ink. At the very bottom, the ink was still wet. Riley. Next to my name was a room number. Room 101. The monkey pointed a furry finger down a branching corridor to the left. I hesitated. "What's in room 101? The monkey grinned. It was a fixed, painted grin, but the corners of its mouth seemed to stretch wider than the plastic should allow. It raised its cymbals. Clash. The sound was deafening in the quiet hall. The lights flickered. I gripped the stolen keys tight in my remaining hand. "Room 101, I muttered. "Fine." I turned left. The hallway stretched out, the perspective seemingly elongated. The doors on either side were closed. I could hear things behind them. Behind room 4, I heard the sound of a child crying. Behind room 12, I heard the sound of breaking glass over and over. Behind room 88, I heard my mother's voice, singing a lullaby, but the words were backwards. I kept walking. My wooden joints clicked softly on the carpet. I reached room 101. The door was plain, unfinished wood, pine, just like me. There was no handle, just a keyhole. I looked at the ring of keys. The black iron key was still in the factory door. I had the brass key, the silver one, and a few others. But then I looked at my left hand, at the stump where my finger used to be, the screw protruding from the wood. I looked at the keyhole. It wasn't a standard lock, it was a threaded hole. I pressed my stump against the hole. The screw caught the threads. I turned my whole body, squeak, grind. I was the key. The door clicked. It swung open. I stepped inside and screamed. The scream didn't come from a throat. I had no throat. It was the sound of dry wood shearing against itself, a tectonic grinding of my ceramic jaw forcing open against the stiffness of the varnish. It was a mechanical shriek of absolute rejection, the sound a machine makes right before it seizes. Because I knew this room, I didn't just recognize it, I felt it in the phantom nerves that still ghosted through my timber limbs. The door clicked shut behind me, the screw lock disengaging from my stump with a wet pop, sealing seamlessly into the wall. The seam vanished. The door was gone. I stood on a floor of yellow linoleum. It was peeling at the corners, revealing black rot underneath. The air here was hot, stagnant, and smelled of Vicks, Vapo-Rub, and stale soup. It was my bedroom, not my bedroom as an adult, not the sterile apartment where I'd been taken. This was my bedroom from when I was 7 years old. But the scale was wrong. I looked up. The ceiling was a mile high. The glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the plaster were the size of dinner plates. The bed, my bed, with a spaceship duvet loomed like a mountain range to my left. The dust bunnies under the frame were gray tumbleweeds of hair and lint large enough to engulf me. I wasn't just a doll. I had been shrunk, or the world had swollen. "Don't look at the bed," the voice whispered. It sounded nauseous. "Look at the window. Find the latch." I turned my stiff neck toward the window. It was massive, a sheet of glass stretching upward into the gloom. Beyond the glass, there was no outside. No streetlights, no moon. Just a swirling, fleshy gray mist that pressed against the pane like a living bruise. Something tapped on the glass from the outside. A finger the size of a tree trunk, tipping a nail against the pane. Tap, tap, tap. I backed away, my wooden heels clicking sharply on the linoleum. "Riley?" The voice didn't come from inside my head. It came from the bed. It was a wet, heavy sound. The sound of meat slapping together. I froze. My internal gyros spun wildly, trying to keep me upright as terror threatened to buckle my knees. I slowly ratcheted my head toward the bed. The duvet shifted. The sound was like a landslide of heavy fabric. A hand rose over the edge of the mattress. It was a human hand. Pale, fleshy, covered in fine hairs. It was colossal. The knuckles were white with strain as they gripped the bedding. Then the face rose. It was me. It was Riley. But it was the Riley I remembered seeing in the mirror before the accident. The human Riley. Soft skin, wet eyes, hair that moved with the air currents. It pulled itself up, the mattress springs groaning under the weight of tons of flesh. The giant Riley looked down at the floor, searching. His eyes were red-rimmed, roomy, sick. "I dropped one," the giant Riley mumbled. His voice was a thunderclap that rattled my porcelain teeth. "Where did it go?" He leaned over the side of the bed. His face descended like a falling moon. I saw the pores on his nose, vast craters of oil and dirt. I smelled his breath, a hurricane of sour milk and decay. I was paralyzed. This was my body. That was me. That is not you, the voice hissed, sharp and frantic. That is the husk. That is the meat you left behind. It has no soul. It only has hunger. The giant Riley's eyes, huge, watery orbs, scanned the floor. They swept over the discarded socks the size of sleeping bags. They swept over the toy chest. They locked onto me. The pupils constricted. There you are, the giant rumbled. A smile spread across his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a muscle spasm, a twitch of facial nerves, mimicking joy. My little wooden man. The hand descended. It came down fast, a canopy of flesh blocking out the light. Move! I screamed internally. I threw myself to the side. My wooden joints shrieked. I rolled over a ridge in the linoleum just as the giant fingers slammed into the floor where I had been standing. The impact shook the room. Dust rained down from the stratosphere. "Don't run," the giant whined. It sounded like a petulant child, but deeper, distorted by the sheer size of the vocal cords. "I need to fix you. You're broken." The hands swept sideways, fingers curling into a rake. I scrambled up, my boots slipping on the slick floor. I ran toward the underside of the bed. It was the only cover. "He'll crush you," the voice warned. "He doesn't know his own strength. He thinks he's playing." I dove into the shadow beneath the bed frame just as the hand swiped past. The wind of its passage nearly knocked me over. I tumbled into the dust, coughing a dry, rattling sound in my hollow chest. Under the bed, it was a cathedral of shadows. The dust bunnies were enormous here, fibrous tangles of gray wool and hair. I saw things caught in them. Giant, discarded things. A marble the size of a beach ball, a coin the size of a manhole cover, and other dolls. I stopped, my heart cage vibrating. They were scattered in the gloom. Plastic soldiers melted by magnifying glasses, teddy bears with their stuffing ripped out, action figures with missing limbs. They weren't moving. I crawled toward a soldier. His face was a melted ruin of green plastic. "Help me," I whispered. The soldier didn't move. But as I got closer, I saw something etched into the plastic of his base. Property of Riley. I looked at the bear. A tag on its ear. Property of Riley. I did this, I realized. The horror was cold, colder than the toy maker's liquid nitrogen. When I was a kid, I broke them, and now the cycle closes. The voice said. The breaker becomes the broken. The bed frame groaned above me. The mattress sagged, the springs shrieking like tortured metal. "Come out, little man," the giant's voice boomed, vibrating through the floorboards. "I have the glue. I have the lighter. We're going to make you better." A face appeared at the edge of the bed frame, upside down. The giant Riley was hanging his head off the side of the bed to look underneath. His hair dangled like stalactites. His bloodshot eyes widened as he spotted me. He reached under. There was nowhere to go. I was backed against a wall of gray dust and the baseboard. The hand closed around me. It was warm. Horribly, wetly warm. The skin was clammy and slightly greasy. The fingers wrapped around my torso, pinning my arms to my sides. I felt the pressure immediately, the creak of my pine ribs, the strain on the screws holding my spine together. I thrashed. I kicked my heavy boots against the meat of his palm. It was like kicking a mattress. He lifted me up. I rose into the air, the stomach churning ascent, leaving my senses reeling. The world spun. I was brought face to face with the giant. He sat cross-legged on the bed now, holding me up to his eyes. He squinted. "You're scratched," he murmured. He touched the scorched side of my face with a finger the size of a sausage. The touch was rough. His fingerprint ridges were like sandpaper, and you're missing a finger. He frowned. A tear, thick and viscous as syrup, welled in his eye. I hate broken toys, he whispered. He reached for the bedside table. There, sitting next to a lamp that burned with the intensity of the sun, was a toolkit. But the tools were wrong. The hammer was made of bone. The screwdriver was a sharpened rib. And there was a bottle of glue. But the liquid inside was red and pulsing. "I'll fix you," the giant said. He set me down on the duvet. The fabric was soft, jagged terrain, difficult to stand on. I tried to stand, but he pushed me down with one finger. Press. The weight was immense. "Stay," he commanded. He picked up the bone hammer. "We need to test your reflexes," he said. His voice lacked all empathy. It was pure curiosity. The curiosity of a boy with a magnifying glass and an anthill. I looked at the hammer. Then I looked at the glue. "The window," the voice urged. "The mist outside. It's better than this. Anything is better than this." I waited. The giant raised the hammer. "Time for the doctor," he giggled. As the hammer came down, I didn't try to block it. I rolled down the slope of the duvet, gathering speed. The hammer struck the mattress, where I had been thumped, sending a shockwave through the fabric that launched me into the air. I was airborne. I flailed, my wooden limbs cycling. I fell off the side of the bed. It was a long drop. I hit the nightstand on the way down. Crack. Pain flared in my shoulder. Real pain. The wood splintering. I tumbled off the edge of the nightstand and landed in the open drawer. I landed on paper. I scrambled up, dizzy, my left arm hanging loose, the socket damaged. I was in the drawer. It was filled with drawings. Crayon drawings on paper the size of rugs. I looked at the drawing beneath my feet. It was a picture of the factory, drawn in crude black crayon. The pipes, the steam, the gears. And in the center of the factory, drawn in red wax, was a stick figure. It wasn't Riley. It was the toy maker. But the label written in childish scrawl underneath didn't say toy maker. It said, "Daddy." My ceramic heart skipped a beat. The drawer began to slide open. Light flooded in. The giant's face appeared in the opening. He wasn't smiling anymore. His expression was dark, petulant, angry. "You're not playing right," he hissed. He reached into the drawer, not to grab me, but to crush me. His fist was a battering ram. I saw something in the corner of the drawer, a matchbox, a giant matchbox. I scrambled toward it as the fist descended. I dove inside the open sleeve of the box just as the fist slammed into the papers. Wham! The impact crumpled the drawings. The drawer shook. I was inside the matchbox. It smelled of sulfur and dry wood. There were matches in here, logs of timber with red bulbous heads, and something else, huddled in the back of the matchbox, shaking, holding its knees. Another doll. It was made of tin. It was dented, rusted, and missing an eye. It looked at me with its remaining glass eye, terrified. It held a finger to its lips. "Shh," the tin soldier whispered. Its voice was a tiny metallic scrape. "He breaks everything he touches. He's looking for the core." "The core?" I whispered back. "The heart," the soldier said. "He eats them to try and feel real again." "Outside," the giant roared. The drawer was being pulled all the way out. The box shifted. We were sliding toward the drop. "We have to move," I said. "No," the soldier whimpered. "He'll see us." "He sees us anyway," I snapped. I grabbed one of the giant matches. It was heavy, a log of pine. I hugged it to my chest. The drawer tilted. Gravity took over. The matchbox slid out of the drawer, tumbling into the abyss between the nightstand and the bed. We fell in darkness. "Strike it," the voice commanded. "Strike the match." As we tumbled, I maneuvered the match head against the rough sandpaper strip on the side of the box. I kicked off the tin. "Soldier, using the force to drive the red phosphorus head against the strip. FSSS, a flare of blinding light. The match ignited. I was holding a torch the size of a telephone pole, burning with a roaring yellow flame. We hit the floor. The carpet broke our fall, but the impact jarred every screw in my body. The matchbox shattered. The tin soldier flew out, skittering into the darkness under the bed. I stood up, holding the burning match with both hands. The flame licked upward, illuminating the cavernous space under the nightstand. And there, illuminated by the firelight, I saw the shoes. Not the giant's shoes. These were black leather boots, polished, metal-tipped. They were standing right in front of me. I looked up past the shins, past the knees, standing in the shadow of the giant's room, watching the giant tear apart the bed above us, was the toy maker. But he wasn't looking at the giant. He was looking at me. The blue flame of his eyes burned brighter than my match. Interesting, the toy maker said. His voice wasn't muffled anymore. It was crisp, clear, and sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. The projection is rejecting the host. He leaned down. The iron mask reflected the fire in my hands. You lit a fire in the nursery, Riley, he whispered. Naughty boy. Above us, the giant stopped trashing the bed. Daddy? The giant's voice called out, trembling. The toy maker looked up at the underside of the mattress. Quiet thing. I am working. He turned back to me. He extended a hand, not to crush, to invite. You have a choice, little puppet, the toy maker said. The meat up there wants to consume you to fill its own emptiness. It is a mindless consumer, a child. He pointed a metal finger at my chest. I offer a purpose. I offer the machine. Give me the key you stole, and I will let you burn the meat. I looked at the burning match in my arms. I looked up at the bed where my former self, my grotesque, bloated former self, was whimpering in fear of the daddy. I looked at the keys hanging from my belt. Burn him? I asked. Incinerate the past, the toy maker promised. Only then can you be forged. The tin soldier scrambled out from the debris behind me. Don't listen, the soldier squeaked. He doesn't fix. He only repurposes. The toy maker didn't even look at the soldier. He just stepped on him. Crunch. The tin soldier flattened instantly. A small puff of rust was all that remained. I gripped the burning match tighter. The heat was blistering the paint on my hands. If I burn him, I said, my voice steady, do I get to leave room 101? The toy maker nodded. Room 101 is for those who cannot let go. Let go, Riley. Burn the soft, weak thing you used to be. I looked up at the mattress slats. I could hear the giant crying. It was a pathetic, gurgling sound. I realized then what Room 101 was. It wasn't torture, it was a test of allegiance. I lifted the heavy, burning match. Boost me, I said to the toy maker. The toy maker paused. Then, a low, grinding chuckle escaped his mask. Excellent. He lowered his massive, scarred hand. I stepped onto his palm. He lifted me up past the dust bunnies, up past the nightstand. He lifted me to the edge of the bed. The giant Riley was sitting there, wiping his nose with his forearm. He saw me rising, carried by the monster he feared. His eyes went wide. Riley? The giant whispered. No, don't. I looked at the face I had worn for 30 years. I saw the weakness in the chin, the fear in the eyes, the pathetic need for comfort. I swung the match. I thrust the roaring flame into the hanging corner of the duvet. The synthetic fabric caught instantly. Whoosh! Orange fire raced up the side of the mountain. The giant screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of a child realizing the game is over. No. My bed, my room. The fire spread fast, eating the oxygen. The air grew hot. The toy maker lowered me back to the floor. "Beautiful," he murmured, watching the conflagration. "The varnish will set nicely in this heat." I watched my former self flail at the flames, swatting uselessly as the fire caught his pajamas. But I wasn't watching the fire. I was watching the door, the one I had entered through. The heat was melting the wall. The bedroom reality was peeling away like burnt skin. Behind the peeling wallpaper of the nursery, I saw metal. I saw gears. I saw the exit. "I did what you asked," I said to the toy maker. "You did," he agreed. He held out his hand for the keys. "Now, the keys." I looked at the keys. I looked at the melting wall. I looked at the burning giant, who was now collapsing, turning into melting wax and black smoke. "He's distracted," the voice whispered. Asterisk. "The fire is chaos. Chaos is cover." Asterisk. I didn't give him the keys. I threw the burning match at the toy maker's apron. It was soaked in oil. The toy maker roared in surprise as the flame licked up his chest. He swatted at it, stepping back. I ran toward the melting wall, toward the gears exposed by the heat. "You treacherous little splinter," the toy maker bellowed. I didn't look back. The heat was warping my back, bubbling my paint. I dove through the hole in the reality. I hit cold metal, hard. I was out of the room. I was back in the dark, industrial guts of the machine. But I wasn't alone. As I scrambled to my feet, a shadow fell over me. Not the toy maker. It was the monkey, the bellhop from the desk. It was standing in the maintenance tunnel, blocking my path. It held its symbols wide, and for the first time, it spoke. "Checkout time," it rasped. It slammed the symbols together, clang. The sound wasn't noise. It was a shockwave. It hit me in the chest. My vision fractured. My wooden knees gave out. Darkness took me. I woke up to the sound of sawing. Rrrsh, rrrsh, rhythmic, hypnotic. I couldn't move. I couldn't see. I was face down. I could smell sawdust. Fresh, resinous pine. "He's awake," a voice said. A new voice. Clinical. Bored. "Does the graft hold?" asked another. "The wood is accepting the iron, but the soul is rejecting the rivets. Hammer them in harder." Wham! Pain exploded in my spine. I tried to scream, but my mouth was sewn shut. I felt myself being lifted, rotated. I opened my eyes. I was strapped to a table. Above me, surgical lights blinded, but they weren't doctors. They were mannequins. Headless, plastic mannequins in surgical gowns. And they were taking me apart. My left arm, the one I had used to open the door, was gone. In its place, they were fitting something else, something heavy, something that hummed with a dark electric hunger, a chainsaw. "Welcome to the modification floor, Unit 734, the headless surgeon said, its voice emanating from a speaker in its chest. "Management has approved your upgrade." I looked at my new arm. The chainsaw blade twitched. "Rev it," the voice inside me whispered. It sounded different now, harder, cold steel instead of wood. "Rev it and cut the straps." I focused on the chainsaw. I felt the connection. It wasn't flesh and bone, it was wire and spark. I triggered the motor. VRRR roar. The headless surgeons paused. "Restraint failure," one said calmly. I swung the chainsaw.